Well, thank you, Mr. Altaga, so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be able to be with the other Great Hearts parents. And although I wish, of course, we were all in person, this is still a really great experience to be able to be together virtually and online together. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about technology, the liberal arts, and parenting. And my colleague, Mrs. Joseph, is going to be a lot more practical in her things that she's going to say in a few minutes. But for mine, I want to talk a little bit more theoretically about technology and how it works. But before I do that, I want to tell you a little bit more about me and my family. So we are the Dyer family. My wife, Amber, is a literature professor. She teaches at a nearby college. But our two kids, Benjamin and Rebecca, are in third and fifth grade. You got to get that right? They're finishing up third and fifth grade this year. And I also work at a graduate school in the Dallas area. I teach there, and I also do some administrative work. And in the background, I've always been a web developer. So just to show you a little bit about my own involvement in technology, I've been developing websites for about 20 years and contributed to a number of big companies, one of which was WordPress. So I built the audio video framework for WordPress, which runs about a third of websites right now. And so at the risk of accidentally showing some pop culture here in a Great Hearts setting, I just wanted to show you that this little video player or audio player that's on StarWars.com is something that I developed a few years back. So I've been in the technology world for a long time, and I'm really excited to get to talk about technology with you. And we're going to talk about 8 things, but the first one is just one that I think we have to acknowledge right away, is that everything that we want to do in our homes with technology has to some degree changed in this area of the pandemic. And as much as the phrase, we're all in this together, is kind of cliche, it is true, though, of the way that parents come around technology and they think about how their kids and their friends' kids will interact with one another. And if you're like me, you grew up in the 80s when we didn't have all these same things. And so it seems like from this great painting from the Sistine Chapel that God and humanity are in harmony and things are going really, really great. And then this great comic kind of illustrates that what happens once all of these devices came along, that our world has been disrupted for probably the last 10 to 20 years. And even if smartphones are a lot newer today, there's a lot newer and more pressing distractions to be dealing with. And so we love these things, but we're also trying to figure out how to deal with them. And I also want to acknowledge up front that every one of the families at Great Hearts is going to be a little bit different. We have families of all different sizes from different religions and ethnic backgrounds, and some have 2 parents and some have a blended family and some are living with grandparents, that each of us has a unique set of things that we're called to really manage. But we also have some things that are in common. So all of us are probably concerned with technology to some degree. That's going to be common to all of us, even if we come to different conclusions. At the same time, everyone who's a Great Hearts parent is there because we care about our kids' education. We care about the way that they're formed and what they're learning and what kind of person they become as they go out into society. And I think we can all agree that even if we have slight differences in the way that we treat technology, that we're always going to be better when we do these things together. So if we start with that, then we can also acknowledge, that technology really does do amazing things. This is part of the reason why I love this career. I know when we first talk about technology, sometimes we come to the worries. So Common Sense Media has done a lot of surveys, and a lot of parents are worried about their kids getting addicted to technology, of oversharing to people who might be predators, of their sleep, all kinds of other worries that we have. We may even be worried about what kind of content they're exposed to online. We know that most kids will see some type of scary or dark images at some point pretty early on. And so we as parents have to have a plan, not just to try to protect them from it, which we do want to do, but also to say, you're going to see something online. You need to have a plan for that. So we tell our kids to close the laptop if they ever see anything that scares them or they know they shouldn't see, and then just to come tell us about it, and we'll keep that dialogue open. But for all these scary things, there's also these amazing things that are out there, right? Of this little girl getting a custom 3D printed arm, that we can be joyful about all the things that humans contribute to civilization, to making things and to making the world better, to promoting human flourishing. Just like this little boy is hearing his dad for the first time, that little finger there, that he got a cochlear implant and now he's hearing. That there is so much of fully awakening all of who we can be as humans when we use technology in a proper way. So I think this gets us to another point about where we are with Great Hearts, is that the humanities themselves actually lead to a kind of humane technology. Steve Jobs was really famous for making this point, because he would often want to connect technology and the liberal arts. He would want to connect things that do things, but also with beauty and the human soul. So if we look back into, even if we go into Google and we type in what is technology, it'll give us a definition of things, but it's also going to point us back that our great heroes of the Greek traditions We're using this word a long time ago. There's a word, techne, which means artisanship or craftsmanship, making things. And they connected this with this word, logia, to make technology in the English language. And that even Jesus was called a tectone, a maker. And we translate that word carpenter because we think that the kind of technologist that Jesus was someone who worked with wood and nails. So this goes way back to Aristotle and Plato beginning to talk about the things that we make and how they form us. So again, when we think about traditional education, there's so many wonderful things about it, but its primary aim, I think, is to produce a skilled worker, someone who has a set of skills that allows them to do a job. And that is a good thing. But classical education takes a step back and says, what we really want to do is, yes, to have skills, yes, to have workers, but to produce someone who is full of virtue, who has certain innate qualities and characteristics, that they understand what it means to be a human, and not only what it means to be a human for oneself, but also how to be a contributing citizen in society. So we're focused on developing and cultivating the heart. That's why we call it Great Hearts. And that's why I've got the little shirt here that I'm wearing. We want to produce virtuous citizens who can be skilled workers, but are virtuous citizens first. And this basic idea that Aristotle gives us, that every habit, everything that we do repeatedly, those things are the things that shape us. And whatever we do habitually will eventually transform us into something else. And so we want to expose our kids to things that are good and true and beautiful, and to form them in habits that will make them into the kinds of people who can be virtuous citizens. And believe it or not, the technology people of today are actually saying the best technology workers are those who have that pattern in their lives, not just those who know how to be programmers or engineers, but those who are first virtuous citizens, who have the liberal arts background. So our own Mark Cuban in the Dallas area would say, I think there's going to be a greater demand for liberal arts majors than programming majors. And he goes on to say it's because these are people who can't just look at data and process it, but who understand what it means, who understands what it means to be a citizen in a human society and contribute to its flourishing and do things in an ethically positive way. So Cuban and others are talking about this movement toward needing the liberal arts as a foundation. So we've talked about technology being a good thing, about being compatible with the liberal arts, and now we want to talk about some of the trickier things with technology, the way in which it can sometimes transform us in unexpected ways. So one of the natural conclusions would be to look at a tool like a shovel and just say, hey, look, I realize that you can do good things with a shovel and you can do bad things with a shovel. You could build a house or a castle that would be good and it would contribute to the society, or I could do something bad. I can steal something and bury the treasure. But we would say the tool itself, it's obvious that it would be neutral, right? But if we think a little bit more deeply about what happens when you use a shovel, if you use a shovel all day long, your body changes. Your hands get blisters, which turn into calluses. And over time, you're transformed. And the thing that's interesting about this is that whether you're doing something morally good or morally bad, whenever you use a tool, it's shaping you. That shovel is shaping your hands and your body and your mind. And we know this intuitively when we think about how often when we do something repeatedly, it changes us. So when we go to a gym, we choose different tools, different technology, based on how we want it to change us if we use that tool repeatedly. So we know that different types of tools will shape us in different directions. This is obvious to us, but what's not so obvious to us is, what does this device do? How does it change us? When we are using phones, regardless of the content, how does it change us? So we often ask questions like, how should I use a phone? What should I use it for? But we also want to become adept at saying, how is it going to shape me? How will it shape my mind, my relationships, and how I commune with others and how I learn? So even Steve Jobs, again, was fond of saying that he loved the iPads for work. He thought they were excellent devices that he could sell to businesses, but he did not want them in his own home. He did not allow his own children to use iPads, not because he was concerned just about the content on the iPads, but because he was concerned about the way it would shape their mind as young people and what it would make them capable or incapable of doing. So if technology is always shaping us when we use any tool, it's also transforming the way that we communicate with one another and how we process and understand information inside and outside of the classroom. So if this was the first slide I had shown at the beginning of the presentation, you might be questioning Mr. Altaga's decision to have me here. And the reason for it is that if you are a Great Heart Scholar, you will probably notice that I have misspelled a word there. I've misspelled the word awesome. I also have truly bad color contrast and bad font choices. What's happening here is that there's a message in the slide that says I'm good at PowerPoint, but the slide itself, the medium, the technology, the color scheme is saying a different message. It's saying I'm not good at PowerPoint. I'm not good at composition. So these two things are in conflict. The medium and the message are saying different things. And we know this when we tell our kids that 90% of communication is nonverbal. It's gestures and hand motions and tone of voice. Well, technology sort of has a tone of voice to it too that shapes what is taken in by us when we communicate with others. When we say, for example, try to tell a joke on a text message, but it's interpreted as something mean. That the technology is reshaping that, not quite as drastically as this slide, but technology is always doing that. And this is true in the classroom too. A lot of studies has been done on what type of screens in a classroom are helpful. So, for example, in this study, it would say that math, science, and reading are all increased or all done better. Kids get higher grades by 10 to 15% when you put a data projector in a classroom. But when you put laptops or desktops or especially tablets in a classroom, students actually decrease their grades by 10 to 15% as well. So you notice that in a Great Hearts classroom, it's not that it's anti-screen or anti-technology, it's just that it's scientifically based decisions about which technologies will form our learners into more virtuous citizens. So our students and our scholars can use those projectors. They can learn about history and geography. They can learn about literature with them. But we found that the data says that having tablets in the classroom wouldn't do that. So again, remember, the goal is to be habituating people in a direction that helps them to see the good, the true, and the beautiful, and to do this over time in a way that changes them by the habits that they have. But that's both in terms of content and in terms of media. So that's why not only why we read the best books, but why we read them on paper, because of what the science tells us about how that paper forms us. Now again, screens are really, really helpful, but we have to remember in our own homes that screens are somewhat ambiguous. What I mean by that is it's sometimes hard to know what a screen is for. So when you see a shovel, you know what it's for. When you see a pan, you know what it's for. When you see a piano, you press the keys and you pretty quickly figure out what it does. But when a kid sees a parent with a screen, it's not entirely apparent what's happening there. The kids have to kind of learn over time what it is that this device actually does. And some of us parents, we actually narrate what it is that we're doing because it's not really clear. Are we being entertained? Are we doing work? Are we socializing? This device, because it can do anything, needs to be formed and shaped in a particular direction by us as parents. I would say one other thing that's worth noting, unlike a shovel, that a lot of our modern technology is designed for addiction. So when we think about an efficient slot machine, an efficient, good, well-programmed slot machine would show all three symbols at the exact same time. But what slot machine owners know is that if you show them in sequence, 1, 2, 3, then each of those creates a dopamine hit that makes you want to pull the lever again. Well, Instagram and Twitter and TikTok and all those things are based on the same principle. If they were designed to be efficient, everything would load at once. But you notice on this Instagram screen, when it comes up, it's blank. And then after a second or two, it shows me the last picture that I saw. And then instead of loading everything all at once, it waits a few more seconds to show me how many likes and friend requests I get. And then it waits a few more seconds to show me more photos. Each one of those is a dopamine hit that's designed to make me want to come back to the application. So these social media platforms are designed in the same way this slot machine is. It's designed for me to return. Because whenever something is free, you and your attention are the product. And so we want to be very careful about teaching our kids about how these things are designed in some ways to manipulate us. One other thing that I like to do with my own kids is to think about not just the idea of screen time, of how much screen time, but to be thinking about what kind of screen time, to be thinking about what the habits are that are forming and shaping them. And so rather than just have one big block of 1 hour or 2 hours of screen time, we like to think about different categories of screen usage. So you notice on the right is kind of all the things that we typically do with a screen. We might consume something that's entertaining as an individual by ourselves. But if we move over onto the left side, if we have any of those categories in mind, if we're doing something that's creative rather than consumption, or maybe we're consuming something but it's enriching and not just entertaining, or maybe we're doing something entertaining but we're doing it together as a community with other friends and people. This changes the characteristics of the screen in I think, some positive ways. So we encourage our kids, if they want to use their screens, that if they're using them for creative things, if they're writing screenplays, or if they're making movies with their friends, or if they're doing enriching schoolwork in the pandemic with Great Hearts, these are all excellent uses of screens. But leaning totally onto the right side of consumptive entertainment by themselves, those are the things that we want to try to avoid. And so as we think about these things, we want to just remind ourselves that this is going to be a communal effort. If we're going to figure out how to use and navigate technology well, we need to come together as a community to do this. So there are some things as we think about the ages of our kids, as we move them from birth out to launching them into becoming virtuous citizens, there are some blocks that we can be thinking through together as to when we might want our kids to do things. So the science, the American Pediatric Association would say that from 0 to 2, kids really shouldn't have screen time at all. That even programs that promise to be educational really aren't educational, that they don't do anything good for our kids. In fact, they might hold them back. And then from 2 to 6, really we want to limit these things to an hour a day and try to keep them to things that they're doing with other people and not just by themselves. Now, again, we have to recognize that in this era, we're in a kind of a unique time. And if we have kids of a variety of different age ranges, these are really hard to do. But these are kind of the science. These are the things that our doctors tell us that would be the ideal and best case. But as we get older into elementary school, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Thinking about when our kids enter into school, how can we help them know that when they're using a screen, screens are for creativity, for making things, for doing things for other people, not just for entertainment. And as they get later on into elementary school, how do we teach them how to use the internet, but also make sure that it's as protected as possible, that they don't just have open devices, open phones, or open computers, but that we've done some work to maybe have a router or use the screen time tools on your Android or your Apple devices to make sure that they're as protected as possible. And as we move into the later middle school years, we begin to think about things like maybe offering our kids a dumb phone at a particular age and saying, yes, we want you to be able to communicate, but we don't want to have a device full of all the things that are designed to distract you and designed to keep you coming back. But at some point, before our kids go out into society, we need them to know how to use these things. And so we might choose 16 as an age where we might send our kids out with a device. Wherever you are along the spectrum, pairing alongside with other friends and other parents and saying, together we're going to do it at these ages so that we can, as a community, come around our kids and help shape them in a helpful way. So I hope those give you some good tips, some initial starting points and understanding of how technology works. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mrs. Joseph, who will go into some more depth, some more really practical ways of thinking through social media. Thank you so much.